I'd like to begin this evening by opening up all of our topics that we have for the conference. And tonight I'm going to be covering the topic starting a fellowship or a congregation, specifically starting a Messianic fellowship or congregation. And tomorrow we're going to talk about, tomorrow morning, about establishing elders, and then about congregational life, and then finally the last topic will be identity with Israel. And all of these topics are kind of geared to be as practical as they possibly can to you whom are, for the most part, already into fellowships, already trying to get established into congregations. And so a lot of what I'm here to share with you is to encourage you and to strengthen you a little bit in your resolve, and maybe give you some tips and part of the milestones and what the roadway is going to look like down over the hill as to what the Lord is doing. You are a part of, whether you realize it or not, a much greater movement that has been going on over this last generation called the Messianic movement. I would remind you that back some 25 years ago was really some of the first Messianic conferences ever to take place. Just 25 years ago. And there was a very famous Messianic Jew in those days. He's gone on to be with the Lord. His name was Dr. Daniel Fuchs. I did not actually hear this statement, but it's been relayed to me as to what he shared. And he was sharing about 10 years previous. So we're really talking about something that he's talking about was about 35 years ago. Now, for youngsters, 35 years ago is like way back there, but for most of us, we know that 35 years is not that far back. And Dr. Fuchs stood up in the assembly and he said, "Brethren," he said, I wish that you could see what I have seen. I wish that you could have a sense of what he had witnessed that the Lord had already begun to do." And he stood up and he said, "Guys," he said, 10 years ago, he said there were five Messianic Jews. And he knew their names, he knew their wives' names, he knew their addresses, their phone numbers, their anniversary dates, and the names of their children and their birth dates. 5 Jews who would stand up in an assembly, proclaim Yeshua, and still be a Jew. 5. And there wasn't a whole lot of congregations. In fact, there wasn't any. There wasn't any fellowships. Now, the fascinating thing is that when he shared that some 25 years ago, he was sharing it to an assembly of 2,000 leaders. 2,000 leaders. And now today, it is even way more than that. In fact, the estimated number is that there is well over 100,000 Messianic Jews. They're estimating there are 30,000 Messianic Jews in Israel. And that's estimated by the secular press in Israel. 30,000 Messianic Jews that believe. The really fascinating part of this is, and it's a little disturbing to some of my Messianic Jewish brethren, is that along with all these great Messianic Jews that are coming to faith, about 3/4 of the people who are in our assemblies are not Jews. We're not really sure exactly who they are. See, some of my Messianic brethren are not sure exactly who they are. But there seems to be a whole lot more other people who are joining in with the house of Judah in this phenomena, this event of Jews coming to faith in this generation. To report the words of a recent rabbi who was complaining that there are more Jews who have come to faith in Jesus in the last 19 years than in the previous 1900 years. To get a sense of what really has been taking place in this generation is phenomenal spiritually in terms of, and the only thing that it can be compared to is the generation after the resurrection, when the gospel began to first be preached. It's the only thing that even comes close to how a small group has begun to emerge in various places, and fellowships and congregations are popping up. There's no single leader. I wish I could lay claim to that I had gone out and started so many congregations and so forth. There are other Messianic leaders as well. Nobody can lay claim to it because they just are popping up all over the place in the most interesting places, in fact. I can remember when I first got involved in the Messianic movement, we were happy to announce that we had 50 established congregations. That was over 15 years ago. And we were just happy to report that we had like one major congregation, and by the way, a major congregation was less than this assembly. Okay? We considered a major congregation to be like 50 people. That was a major congregation. There was one major congregation in all of the major cities. Now we have multiple congregations in those cities, and we have congregations popping up in all kinds of other places like Abilene, Kansas, of all places. And not only that, but it seems like that as God has established them, that the congregation pops up, and whether it comes with frustration with what's going on, or whether it comes with different groups are emerging, but it's like each congregation is like spawning off all different kinds of groups, and that they're forming other fellowships and congregations, and it's just like it's multiplying like some kind of bacteria or something, you know. But as I look back on it, and I remember the words of Dr. Fuchs, one of the things that I now agree with him on is that it's very evident to me that the Lord is doing something rather incredible and something rather wonderful in these days. Because the truth of the matter is, there is only one thing that we share in common. We're not all Jews. We don't all look the same. We don't come from the same background. The one thing that we share in common is Yeshua is the Messiah. And that was the basis of the original fellowship way back a couple of thousand years ago, was that one testimony of truth. And as Paul said, for we preach not ourselves, but Yeshua and him crucified. We do not go out espousing our culture or our identity or our particular state or whatever it is that makes us look the way we look or talk the way we talk or whatever the case may be. And some may be a little bit confused, thinking that this whole Messianic movement thing, and when I say starting a Messianic fellowship or congregation, that it's this kind of Jewish stick. It's not. That is not it. And I can tell you that from the experience of seeing congregations grow and so forth, it's because the people that are in it truly have a sense of that the Lord has called them, is involved with them, and it's really a move of the Spirit of God. And they give attribution to him, not necessarily to the cultural things. And quite honestly, those groups who assert the cultural dimension and try to assert particularly the Jewishness, those congregations and fellowships do not grow. They do not go forward, because that's not what moves the people. That's not what the Spirit of God is really doing. The fact of the matter is, and this is a historical fact, that God chose Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and from their descendants a nation of Israel was formed for the sole purpose to bring forth the Messiah, so that the Messiah would be the pinnacle of our faith. And along with it comes a few trappings, a few symbols, and a lot of culture with it to give us a context so that we can understand some word pictures of what God's doing with all of us. And that doesn't necessarily mean that the emphasis is on the culture or the shtick, but rather it's on the priority of being the Messiah. Moses has taught us, and it's emphasized for us in this last Torah portion of the Shabbat yesterday, that the reality is that all of the customs of the altar service, all of the temple service with the priesthood and so forth, was primarily to illustrate to us the mercy of God. In fact, all of those sacrifices that Moses gave to us and all the whole worship of the temple was structured around the idea, if a man or a group of people, you, unintentionally or accidentally make a mistake concerning the Lord, and that you were being taught by the sacrificial system and by the priesthood that God had established a substitutionary system, that although you had violated a holy God with an unholy thing, that God was willing to show mercy to you and to forgive, and that he would use this substitutionary system as a way to do it. Quite honestly, you do the exact same thing with one another right now.